This story is called Pact and Principle. Jonathan nervously waited at the child's grave for the parents to arrive. He was never sure how it would go, but it was an easy buck, and in some twisted way, he thought maybe he was helping people find closure. The couple soon arrived, recognizing Jonathan from his website. "You must be the medium," asked the man. Jonathan shook his hand. The wife was still distraught and distant due to her recent loss. "Yes, sir. Mr. and Mrs. King?" They nodded. He continued, "I've been honing in on your son for most of the afternoon. I think I have a clear channel to receive any message he may have." He lied. "Can he talk?" The woman spoke, her lip quivering. The psychic felt a momentary pang of guilt but continued the reading. "Yes, I think so. Gary's worried about his pet. Dog or cat." He searched the parents' faces. He was going to have to do this cold. He kicked himself for not at least looking up their Facebook profiles. "What about him?" The father's pleasant effect diminished into a slight scowl. Jonathan was starting to sweat. "He said he's worried the cat will miss him." "Gary hated that cat. You should be ashamed of yourself." The father shook off Jonathan's further attempts at salvaging the session, and the medium watched his $200 walk off. Jonathan paced the cemetery, irritated that he had wasted his time and jeopardized his relatively good brand due to a no-show. Various spirits tried to gain his attention, but he ignored them. "The boy should be here. It's 7 days since. Why isn't he here?" He stormed through a number of apparitions, clear as day to him, but no one else living. Many begged to assist them in some way, some with a specific purpose. Others merely caught up in the trappings of the living. "What, you want me to help you?" He admonished a particularly persistent and ghastly woman. "You died in 1920. Anyone who cared about you is long dead." She vanished, and he could still hear her ethereal sobbing as he made his way toward a newer section of the cemetery. "Is there anyone present who has left the world of the living this century? It's getting harder to make a living out here." "No one?" "That's what I thought." He started up the hill toward that day's burial. He knew it would be a long shot trying to contact one of the freshly departed. It took a few days for spirits to find their land legs, but he was getting desperate for business. As Jonathan ascended the hill, he saw a dark figure under the tent at the new burial site. He assumed it was a priest and hesitated, as most priests and theologians knew him well and hated him because he could not provide services well beyond their abilities. It was better that Jonathan hadn't continued up that path, as his day went from very bad to horrendous when the figure rose over the open coffin and separated the spirit from the corpse. It was better that Jonathan hadn't continued up that path, as his day went from very bad to horrendous when the figure rose over the open coffin and separated the spirit from the corpse. Oh boy. The medium spun on a dime and hoped he hadn't been spotted. He fully intended to leave Valleyview and never return. But he was stopped by an older, familiar, and unusually corporal apparition with surprising strength. "Give me a break. I can't help you," Jonathan said. The former caretaker, Charlie, held him tight. "You know what's going on back there, John. How are you going to just walk out?" The medium shook his suit jacket off into the ghost's hands and continued toward the exit. "Watch me." Jonathan jogged out of the cemetery and went home. 2 weeks passed, and Jonathan needed to get back to business. He tried out some of the newer cemeteries, but they were proverbial ghost towns compared to Valleyview. He had debated going back for days, but ultimately, that was where the money was, so he returned to try and conjure up some fresh spirits. A number of ghosts lined the fence, pleading their cases as he walked to the main entrance. "Sir, my daughter. You've got to tell my daughter not to turn on the range. I'm afraid there's been a terrible gas leak." The messages seemed to all run together, merging in a mishmash of tragedy. "My husband killed my father. Daddy, is that you? They drowned a lot of them in the river." Jonathan had heard their stories countless times. He was on the lookout for someone new who was ready to communicate. He could always sense more spirits, but it took time for some to reveal themselves. As he walked the path through the cemetery, he noticed that the other side had become eerily quiet. Then he saw the shadow. Even the dead were hiding from it. The demon was perched on a mausoleum, waiting for something, possibly waiting for him. But he wasn't going to hang around and find out. Jonathan made a beeline, sure whatever it was had seen him and was watching him. Charlie appeared and easily kept pace with the psychic. "There are plenty of innocent folks in here, John. You're just going up and walk out on them? You of all people or former people should talk, Charlie." The ghost was surprised he knew his name. "I'm making my amends, John." Charlie had taken it upon himself to be a shepherd of sorts, Valleyview's own concierge to the dead. "This has nothing to do with me, pal." "He's been here for months now, John. From what I hear, this is the only game in town. What are you going to do when this demon's collected every lost soul before you can wring your dollar out?" The apparition had a point. Jonathan stopped just outside the main gate to consult the old spirit through the cemetery fence. "I'm not a demonologist or an exorcist for that matter. I channel the dead for a living. I make my money. Everyone gets what they want." Charlie shook his head at the narrow-minded psychic. "I'm afraid an exorcist wouldn't help much in this case. This thing is of the elemental variety, and has been coming and going for a couple centuries now." Charlie had been one of many complicit caretakers who looked the other way when the demon was fed by the cemetery owners. "This isn't 1955. The Valleyview LLC isn't owned by the Lesters anymore, and I really should be going." Jonathan knew much of the local history, having lied his whole life in Leicestershire. The ghost shook his head at the sometimes con man. "Give me another minute, son. There may be a board of directors now, but I assure you, the Pact is passed on." "What Pact?" "Wait, I get what you're saying. You were going to tell me that Lester made a deal with the devil, and that's how the family gained their fortune." The ghost grabbed Jonathan by his tie through the iron fence and yanked him so they were face to face, the dead man revealing his true tormented visage. John shuddered and tried to pull back. "You think this demon is messing around up there?" John shook his head. Charlie released him and returned to a more pleasant effect before continuing. "But in a matter of speaking, yes. The great Harry Lester parlayed a land deal that his great-grandfather made into a wealthy factory town." John sighed. "I'm assuming it's more complicated than that." Charlie knew that this particular shyster medium was the only one who could help. He had never come across a living soul with quite the reach into the world of the dead as Jonathan. When General Clinton cleared this land of natives and drove them from the banks of the Queehana River, Charles Lester made a deal with a local Indian tribe. They leased him their land in return for supplies and aid in escaping with the understanding that someday they would return. Lester was a pioneer out here and had an established trading post for 20 years before the expansion west. This was great farming land. Generations of Lesters grew the family business, leasing lands to Dutch immigrants and amassing the wealth that Harry eventually used to build the first factory. However, the Indians left something behind as a guarantee that their contract with Lester was binding. Jonathan interjected. "They left a demon behind? To do what exactly?" "Their shaman, the land, and the demon are all one and the same. He's bound to the land, and he's determined to fulfill the pact Lester made with his tribe. This thing's been growing more powerful each generation, taking souls and lives as payment, even reaching beyond the cemetery." "I'm not following. How have the Lesters been able to benefit from having a murderous elemental on their land?" "The demon only became a nuisance to Harry Lester when he filled this land with people, houses, and factories. When the creature appeared on the hillside one evening, he panicked and tried to pay the debt all at once. The factory fire in '05 was one of his attempts to feed the beast. It didn't quite work as he had planned, and his son Donald was the one who built this cemetery and figured how to undermine the reach of the demon." Jonathan again interjected. "By feeding it the souls of the dead after burial?" More or less. My father was the caretaker before me. He determined that it only needed a few souls each year to be satiated, and that it had no power in the new portion of the cemetery across the road. So we would bury the bodies outside the creature's domain, and it wouldn't reappear for years until there was some sort of accidental death within or very near the cemetery. The beast was confined to cemetery grounds, and enough folks were dying to feed him. But since he's grown hungrier and powerful enough to draw people in, he's taken the innocent, elderly, even children. So the ownership has from time to time buried new bodies in the old cemetery and even resorted to select living sacrifices, I'm afraid. It won't be long now until the demon can venture out into the valley and take lives and souls as he pleases. Jonathan was horrified. Had he known any of this, he would have left town years ago. Elementals, demons, and shadow forms hated the living, especially the few that could sense them. I can't deal with this. That thing will kill me if it knows I'm around. I've already stayed too long. Best of luck against that thing. Jonathan walked the sidewalk, spirits trailing him on the other side of the fence, begging him not to leave just yet. He looked back one last time before he turned the corner. Charlie shook his head at him and vanished. Jonathan was visited in a dream by a young boy who had recently passed. The boy was desperate to contact his parents and provide them comfort in their grieving. Since the boy had recently been buried in Valleyview, Jonathan would have to risk being found out by the demon if he wanted the payday. He chose the easy money and returned to the cemetery. He vowed to never again step foot in for as long as it had a soul-sucking murderous inhabitant anyway. Charlie was nowhere to be found for once, and Jonathan soon located the spirit of the boy. Will your parents come? What will you tell them when they arrive? John went through his usual series of questions when meeting a new candidate, as if he were interviewing them for a job. My mom is on the edge, and my dad is distant and doesn't know that she might hurt herself. You have to get them to come here together so nothing bad happens. John attempted to comfort the spirit and assured him he would make the connection for him. The boy faded, and John made his way back toward the exit. He wondered where Charlie was, and figured the former caretaker would have another earful for him. He stopped in front of a familiar grave, and the crying woman appeared. Ma'am, have you seen that old caretaker Charlie? She nodded and spoke. His grandson is supposed to be buried today. He is with family. Jonathan felt an odd impulse to see Charlie and offer him his condolences. He walked the path up the old cemetery hill to what appeared to be a family plot. As he crested, he saw Charlie being forcefully handled, his aura fading as the demon drew away his energy. This was all within view of what Jonathan assumed was Charlie's grandson's casket. He hid behind a stone and watched the beast dominate and control the old ghost. Jonathan felt panicked and disturbed, but couldn't imagine how he could aid in any way. It was pretty clear that Charlie was trying to prevent the demon from stealing his grandson's spirit, certainly a losing battle for any solitary ghost. That's when it hit him. There was a cemetery of a countless number around him. Surely their combined force could overwhelm one solitary elemental, he thought. He whispered,
I know you are present. I can practically feel a dozen of you breathing down my neck back here. How many of you have I connected with your loved ones over the years?
No one responded from the gallery he was sure was witnessing the end of Charlie as an entity.
How many of you has Charlie helped during your stay? I've seen for quite some time how he's guided and cared for the newly disembodied. Think about how disoriented you were for those first few hours, days, and weeks. Who helped you accept your current situation?
No specter rose to the occasion. Jonathan swallowed his fear and made a rash decision, his terror subdued by an unnameable fount of selfless inspiration. The charge itself was startling enough that the demon actually turned his attention from Charlie and released him. The creature postured and expanded into its 8-foot frame, towering over Jonathan. Its emaciated clawed hand emerged from under its heavy robe and found a new home in Jonathan's chest. stopping him mid-run and ending his life almost instantly. Blood poured from Jonathan's mouth as the demon removed its hand and turned back to Charlie in the casket which held his grandson. He did not have enough power to remain fully bodied and could not manage to re-enter the second plane of existence without dissipating into the other. Charlie was about to be finished by the elemental and to witness his grandson's soul consumed when a silent army formed around the demon. Many of the spirits, having taken Jonathan's word to heart, and after seeing his lone charge against the demon, they overwhelmed the heinous beast. Many were destroyed, vanished from any kind of earthly existence during the violent struggle. Those that remained forced the elemental back into the earth from where it came. A great deal of the creature's power was lost when they destroyed its terrestrial form. For some time, he and Charlie worked together to guide and acclimate new souls there at Valleyview. Eventually, due to his selfless sacrifice, Jonathan was allowed to pass into an existence and plane beyond the reach of elementals, demons, worldly worry, and strife.